So you will probably have to do this quite a few times to send an artist statement to someone, or to have this kind of elevator pitch talk. It's about 2 or 3 paragraphs long, short and detailed. And it's good to keep a copy on your hard drive, because then you can use it whenever you need it, and just tailor it a little bit to whatever the opportunities are. So with this artist statement, people can look at your work, but they might not understand it, or you want them to understand a specific point about it. So you can dictate how they view your work, and maybe give them some insight that they wouldn't have known before. So this should also be really brief, because we don't have a lot of time to explain ourselves, and to make it click, it needs to really sit right away. But it can explain what your work means, and how you work. And their question would be like, what is your personal relationship to this piece, or your work in general, and what do you do, and what are you trying to accomplish with that? We could start by just describing the medium you're working with. Are you in film or graphic design, or do you like to work with sound, or is there paint involved? Is it all digital? Are there any people you collaborate with? You can talk about that quickly. But it's also interesting sort of to have this thread through the paragraph, to where you came from, where you are right now, and where you're trying to go next. And to find out who you are, that's really hard for visual artists, because we're used to do visuals. We don't really know. We're not trained to write, but we're in communication design, so we should be able to write and communicate that way too. But to find out who we are, first of all, it's like there's one technique called the mind maps. You can write down different keywords that you think fit, and you can try to connect them so they form sort of clusters. And let's say you do in one end photography, in one other end you do illustrations, and in another end you do another medium, and you feel it's very all over the whole field. But the more you zoom out, you find that you might have a certain corner that is like specifically you, and doing these mind maps will make that more visually clear to you as well, so you can start writing about that. Another technique is to be interviewed by a friend. So you can call someone that's familiar with your work, like a colleague that you're studying with, or someone in your family, some friend, but it should be somebody that also knows what you're talking about. And you can ask questions like, who is your audience? Who do you talk to? Are you influenced by a certain style? If you had to explain it really simple to a 4-year-old, how would you explain it? And how do you do your work, like how your work process is? And does this material that you're using, is that somehow connected with the outcome? Does it have, is there something specific about that? For example, this would be a sample question. And how is your work any different from other people? Then you need to be very specific. Nobody wants to read a long paragraph about words like passion, love, success. These are all very general terms. They don't really mean anything. What you need to go drill down is the little details, what makes you peculiar, the peculiarities about you and your idiosyncrasies and of your own character. So also, imagine that you're talking to people that have no idea about your field. You want to avoid jargon. It will make you sound arrogant if you use words that are familiar to you and your genre, but not to everybody in the field. You don't want to come across like that. And don't legitimize yourself by using long academic sentences. People don't have time to read this right now. This is not the place for that. Another good way is to look for spell checking programs like Grammarly or Hemingway. Like writing programs. They're free, and the paid version is also not that expensive. It's really worth it for a student to have. You will write better papers if you get these suggestions. And also, you can go on thesaurus.com or dictionary.com to look up words and find synonyms or acronyms to describe what you do. So you get better words and you can find better suggestions. So after writing down these sentences, another technique is to put them on Post-its and then rearrange them in the paragraphs, so you can find out if there's a certain better way of telling, to have like sort of a thread that goes through the story, that goes from A to B, so it all kind of makes sense, so you're not jumping around in different places. And what you want to do is be very precise, get to the point right away, and use an active voice. So instead of a passive voice where like I was inspired, you can say my inspiration is. That's an active. And you should edit this many times, show it to many people, use different editors to see what they suggest about it. Be very specific to the point, be very clear. And then at the end, you can tailor this to whatever you need to say. You can throw in another sentence here and there if you think it's for different opportunities, and try to always draw the reader into you, so make them interesting. If you talk about them, what they see, and what you could, like if you mention the word you quite often, it draws people in to see what you're talking about, how this is relevant to them, for example. Don't use jargon that people don't understand. Don't use general words. Don't use too much passive voice. There's nothing wrong with it, but not too often. Use necessary but pretentious reference. Don't compare yourself to Michelangelo. You don't include the biographical information here because that's already in your resume and CV. You don't have to mention where you worked and things like that. Don't be overly romantic about this. It's not a novel that you're writing here. And the statements like I hope to, I will to, and I'm trying to, they don't really convey too much confidence. You should be saying that this is what I do. It's not what I'm trying to do. And 3 sentences you can start with is like the how and what and why. How do you create your work, and what are you depicting? What is your imagery, and why does this say about you and the influences and the symbols that you're using? And if you're not a native English speaker, write it in your own language first and then have somebody translate it. Quite often you find there are some abstract ways you can convey your ideas in a different way in your own language that are actually kind of good if you bring these in. That's also your personal kind of way of describing it. And I suggest writing it in the first person, I, or if you're in a group, it would be we. In marketing and advertising, we often use a you as a second person, sort of like you would be interested to know that, something like that. And don't use the third person where you like your name is a something artist, and it seems to me that is not very personal to write in that third person style. So there are quite a few books that you can use with exercises to get started. One that I always recommend is my friend Ian's self-published company called wordshape.com. He sells them for like $10 or so, and it has a bunch of exercises in it to warm up the writing. There's also a longer course by Natalia Ilyin, and she also emphasizes how important it is for graphic designers or for creatives to start writing and describing their work and documenting their work. There are countless other books that I could recommend. I think they're helpful to go through as having a guide to get started, and having like sort of a checklist that you go through when you're doing these exercises. So I hope you write a great artist statement.